Thank you, Corey. And Corey is an activist herself, and so it's very nice to be introduced by her. And it's very inspiring to be here. I think this is the kind of meetings that are very close to the heart of the institution I work for right now. It's this meeting of minds in the private sector and trying to come together, discuss the issues. I was listening with great interest also to the panel earlier today when you need to bring together the private sector and the public sector. Unfortunately, as we see in many of our countries and this region as well, it doesn't happen enough, and it's very gratifying to be part of this, and this initiative is certainly very inspiring for me. I was at the very last minute asked to give you an outlook on the world. I was going to speak about some abstract notion of the knowledge economy and so on. But I will try to, in a very few slides, and I understand they're now being circulated. They may not be so important to look at each one of them. Most of them point downwards, only those that show risk and debt levels point upwards. But let me go through them in a minute, because I think it is, as Corey was saying, a time for deep reflection and action. We are facing something very, very, very serious, and I just come from Brussels late last night, and I wish I could bring you a lot of good news. The only thing I can say is that people are in key positions are very much focused on the issues. So let me say a little bit about what has happened. So I'll walk through the slides very quickly and try to give you a sense of what I think are the key developments and the issues that come out of these developments. So if you look at the global context, what we have seen is a double hit to confidence. We see a very dramatic weakening in the confidence in policymakers' ability. And this comes against, I think, a sort of resurgence in that confidence from the early crisis response. So in the last crisis, after Lehman, after all, what was done by national governments around the world, and particularly in Europe, to stabilize the banking systems, and what was done through coordinated efforts with the international financial institutions, with the private sector in the Vienna Initiative, for example, I think reinforced people's belief that policymakers can do something. I think that is now being undermined on several fronts. There was an uncertainty about what was really the outcome of the July EU summit agreement on Greece, what will come out of the new facility, the European Financial Stability Facility. There was a concern about the EU stress tests not really taking into account the very real sovereign exposures of the banks. A concern about the US debt limit and the downgrading by S&P. And a fundamental lack of action until today, at least, on the need for bank recapitalization in Europe, in the core European banks. And finally, a sense that what's going on at the European Central Bank is, in a sense, the president or the governor fighting the last war. And so all these things taken together, I think, has weakened the confidence in policymakers' ability. The other bit of the confidence problem is about the growth prospects, because I think independent of what happens, even in very benign scenarios, we are looking at, unfortunately, a global recession. I hate to be sort of party pooper, but I think we need to be realistic about what we are looking forward to, and that is the reality. And so what has happened? Well, the numbers, unfortunately, in the first half of this year came out much more negative in core advanced economies. The leading indicators are now very close to signaling recession. If you look at the main stock indices, they have gone down since early August, and there's a very dramatic flight to safety also depressing long-term interest rates in some core countries in Europe. Market risks are up at high level, not the levels that we saw in the Lehman crisis, but still quite high and worryingly high. The flight to safety is hitting EBRD countries as well, so we can see it's in equity markets, we can see it in the sovereign risk across our region. And all is not bad, because there have been a lot done to increase the resilience since 2008. So a global shock, but the resilience in our region has improved in some respects. So the current account deficits have been reduced. Banks are on the whole better capitalized in the region, positive. But there are some measures that have not improved, and so the fiscal buffers that were there are not the same any longer. The gross public financing needs are greater. The private external debt has not really come down as we would have liked. We look at NPLs. Well, they have increased, and they are unfortunately increasing still in some countries, and there are reason to worry about that. And of course, what's happened to some of the currencies, particularly relative to the Swiss franc in some core countries in Eastern Europe or Central Europe, have caused issues, of course, because of the very large exposures towards Swiss franc, particularly in Poland and Hungary. So these are clearly worrying signs, and you can look then at who is most exposed, and what you see is that some Southeast European countries and some Central Eastern European countries are very exposed to trouble in the Eurozone. And if you look at there are very strong interlinkages, actually. The IMF's regional economic outlook that was presented yesterday has a nice part that looks at these interlinkages and tries to see, what does it mean in growth. And basically, if you look at the growth rates, it's a sort of one-to-one correspondence. So a 1% lower growth in the Eurozone has a 1% lower growth rate in emerging Europe. If you look at credit, it's also when credit tightens, it almost one-to-one, not fully one-to-one impact in Eastern Europe. And I think what we are really concerned about now is this deleveraging and potential credit crunch in the region. We see an overall slowdown in growth, even in benign scenarios. We see the Greek banks struggling, systemic as they are in most of the Southeast European countries. And the absolute key issue right now is to find a way of bringing down the borrowing costs of particularly Italy, but also Spain. And these economies are fundamentally sustainable at lower interest rates, but we are unfortunately in a bad equilibrium that becomes sort of self-fulfilling. And this is the key issue facing European and international policymakers right now. And as part of this, of course, the core European banks are threatened because of their exposure to sovereign debt. So we need a very dramatic recapitalization, a coordinated, I would argue, a mandatory recapitalization, and one very soon. And this is ongoing, and I think that maybe there are some positive news, even though it's going to be not going to be easy. These are sort of unfortunately, the reality we are facing. And on top of this, we are facing the challenge of getting growth, because we cannot just have fiscal consolidation, deleveraging. We need to get growth, and particularly, of course, in the periphery countries, the countries that are most exposed now, they need growth. But it's a general problem, and this is what I was going to talk about originally, which I think is both a good and a bad story, and there's a lot of potential certainly in Southeast Europe for more growth. And what I wanted to use this short intervention is to describe a little bit what do we know about how do you create a knowledge-based economy, and what is a knowledge-based economy, and what are the elements that we can find in Southeast Europe for building this knowledge. And it's something that also EBRD has very much, or we want to focus on this going forward. I think it's not something new, but it's something that we realize that has been somehow neglected in transition, and also to some extent, I think, by us. And I'll end with that, what we think we should be doing to promote this. But I thought that there were three cases that could sort of illustrate what could be achieved in the region. These are all names that start with SK, so this Skoda, Skype, and Skolkova. So Skoda, you probably remember the jokes of Skoda, why do Skodas have rear window heating? Well, so that you don't freeze when you have to push it. And this was, you remember the Skodas that were produced in Soviet times. What has happened since then is a remarkable transformation, a tremendous success in terms of customer response. It's now on top of charge in many advanced economies in terms of customer satisfaction. It is exporting to a number of Volkswagen plants around Europe. It's a remarkable transformation. If you take Skype, which started with a small group of programmers, some managerial types from Sweden, and some business ventures from the United States. It's now a company that will valued at around $8.5 billion US dollars. The final example is Skolkova, Russia. Skolkova, and I put question marks around this because I think it's still a very abstract idea, and there are many potential flaws in this kind of approach, but it's trying to create sort of a Silicon Valley at the heart of Moscow, at least in the suburbs of Moscow. And it started as a tax haven, but it's really, there are some very concrete signs that it may actually succeed. It is, MIT has committed to establishing its first campus overseas in Europe. A number of prominent Russian institutions are locating there. International players have committed to locate there. Again, they're all dangerous with creating these islands, but I think there's also some potential in this. So what do we know from these examples and sort of accumulated knowledge? Well, one thing which is very important is that productivity growth comes from two sources. So one is about moving the frontier, the technology frontier. One is about moving towards the frontier. And both these things are important, and particularly I would argue in this region, a lot is about moving to the frontier and taking existing technology, adjusting them, making them work in your environment. When we see the ability of European countries, and here I'm not talking just about Eastern Europe, remarkable difference in how well we do innovation, how well we do this adoption of technology. You have the examples of Finland, Sweden, where are at the very top, Switzerland at the very top, in many ways, according at least to measures that we have, even more successful than the United States on many measures. On the other hand, you have some countries that really have, in many ways, fallen behind. There are countries like Latvia. On one end, you have Estonia that has many of the positive signs, and you have Latvia, a neighboring country that is really lagging in this regard. But you have other European countries that are not doing so well either. And it's also remarkable that within the same European Union, you have this variety. And I think there are two elements here that are key. One is how to enlarge the market, and it was already mentioned the importance of enlarging the market by integrating within the region, but also integrating within the larger Europe. That's absolutely key for innovation. Innovation is spurred by exporting, by enlarging the market that you can sell to, because you need to distribute the cost of R&D on larger sales. You need to reform the ecosystem of innovation. It's about regulation, finance, and incentives, and I know that Božidar Đelić has been very involved in trying to do this in Serbia. It's something that is absolutely key. So let me say, finally, just a few words about some attempts to measure some of these things that we have done and how the region scores. So when we talk about trade barriers, so again, it's about enlarging the market, thinking about how we can sort of create a single market in Europe and really take it seriously. And here it's very important to remember it's not about tariffs so much, it's about all the non-tariff barriers. And we know from a lot of evidence that even very small non-tariff barriers can divert trade. And I showed you here a slide with, on the one hand, you have the business environment measures that we do. We do these measurements together with the World Bank, and that's sort of measuring how entrepreneurs like you experience the environments. Here is about trade barriers. And the other one is doing business, which is sort of measuring what it looks like on the books. And here you can see that it's not the same thing to have gotten rid of trade barriers on the books. You also need to think about how you actually get them, get rid of them for the entrepreneurs as they're trying to operate in the environment. We also do, through these BEEPs, the Business Environment Survey, look at what are the main obstacles facing businesses. And here I've just taken the countries in Southeast Europe and looked at them, and again the three top challenges, and you can just look at them yourself, and you can see this again reporting what businesses tell us, business leaders tell us. Then we have also tried to look at productivity differences, and you can see that from between 2000 and 2008. Some countries like Serbia has improved a lot. I mean, it's maybe when you think about it, not so strange. But also countries like Poland have improved a lot, while in Bulgaria you don't see the same. And you can also see the gap. And again, remember that productivity is affected both by moving the frontier outwards, but much more importantly, I would argue, moving to the frontier. And here there's a lot of potential for further growth. We also have done a management, measuring management quality and using an international established method for doing this, and done this in 12 countries. Unfortunately, only Serbia is among the countries that we looked at in this region. And it just gives you a sense that, well, actually it's not true, but so I give you here only the Serbia, the detail, but you can also see then the management scores for some of the other countries. And you can see that some countries are lagging far behind, and this is a real challenge. And of course here it's about education as well. You can also see that just looking at the distribution of Serbian companies from these graphs, you can see that yes, there are some very well managed companies in Serbia. The real challenge is to get those less well functioning companies better functioning. So there's a longer tail and fatter tail, if you want. And how can you do this? Well, very clearly results show that competition helps. It really, with the more intense competition, the better management quality is in our countries. State ownership, not surprisingly, and here of course the causality may be difficult, not always easy to determine, but private ownership definitely improves, so privatization, engaging with the private sector helps. Education, the more employees you have with tertiary education, the better managed the firms. But also secondary schooling is very important. It comes out very strongly in this data. So to absorb technology, to adapt technology, secondary schooling is very important and not always been emphasized. Here is the slide that shows the PISA ratings. That's a measure really of secondary schooling. And you can see that in the region, the region looks quite good in most subjects when it comes to PISA. But it's still, for most countries, below the OECD average. So there is room for improvement. So if I was to summarize the key challenges for the Southeast European region in terms of creating a knowledge economy, it's about, fundamentally about improving the business environment, encouraging FDI, but also to take advantage of EU accession process, and that was emphasized by the previous speakers as well. So accelerate privatization, restructure medium and large state-owned companies, implement new laws that impact enterprise performance, further developing the financial sector, address corruption. These are not new things, but I think the way to do it is, of course, to bring together a business, put pressure on government to improve this, and be constructive. So finally, what does EBRD want to do with this? Well, as I said, we take it on ourselves that we have maybe not focused enough on this, and we now talk about a multi-pronged approach. So on the one hand, we want to become more serious about finding companies in the ICT sector, but also taking a horizontal approach. So looking at all companies that we invest in and trying to bring out elements that increase the skill level. So it's about training programs, it's about collaboration between universities and companies, it's about human capital, and we think horizontally we can bring out this more clearly in our investments. We are doing a number of innovative products. We have a new program for venture capital investment, basically run by outsiders, but it's money from us. It's in the beginning, it's maybe not so big, 100 million euros, but it's really meant to be seed money for venture capital. We're doing ICT audits, free audits of companies to see where are they lacking in terms of the adoption of ICT technologies. We're taking this very much from our energy efficiency initiative, which I think in the end has really been a remarkable success. Almost 1/3 of what we do now has one or another element of energy efficiency investment. It's very important. We are also involved now in 200 ICT companies through our private equity funds, and we really want to be part of building this part of the financial system in Europe, the private equity venture capital markets. And of course this can only be done through a combination of advisory and sector dialogue and investment. Thank you very much.